Okay, we are live. And thanks for coming in today, Josephus. And
No,
today,
thanks for inviting me,
of
and thanks to
course,
everyone who will be listening to our live stream.
yeah. So this is a favorite topic, I guess, of mine, and perhaps Josephus as well. We've looked at this quite a bit together, so hopefully we can touch on a few of the key points today, because we are looking at the Indo-European Father Sky. And I like to phrase it that way, or Father Heaven is even more precise, I think. But Father Sky is more colloquial, how people discuss this deity and Dyaus of the Vedas, um, because this is the embodied heavens or the embodied sky, the male deity who is the sky or heavens in some sense. And so, for that reason, he is considered the sky father in some sense. But that term is the source of a lot of confusion, and in fact, a ton of confusion. And so that's why I prefer to call this particular deity Father Sky or Father Heaven, to emphasize that he's the other half of Mother Earth. It's this parallelism. Instead of just being the Sky Father, this sort of built up colloquial concept that we are familiar with, connected to Zeus, and kind of deriving from the picture of Zeus. Um, I want to kind of confront people with having to look at the Vedic Dyaus as his own deity, first of all, before trying to make that comparison, because my argument is that and something that I should say a lot of scholars have pointed out, if people follow the comparative mythology scholarship, uh, it is a recurring theme from Dumasil to Nick Allen. Lot Motz's work on this is very thorough. That we should not assume that Vedic Dyaus is mythically from the same root deity as Zeus. So Dyaus of the Vedas, or also maybe referred to as Div. I think Div is how you would pronounce the other form of his name. But he is the sky itself. Therefore, he is Father Sky, and frequently coupled with Mother Earth. So trying to see this deity on his own terms is the starting point that we have to begin with. And so that's what we're doing, because we quickly find that he has an entirely different mythos for the most part, from the Zeus type or the Jupiter type. Um, and he is much more what is thought of as this sort of retiring god, this Deus Otiosus, sort of the god that is in the primordial times as this progenitor figure who is kind of driven off, defeated, um, and kind of recedes into a background deity, a very background figure. That is not at all what Zeus is, but that is what we see with the Vedic figure Dyaus. And I argue that's because he is primarily and almost exclusively just the sky itself, as a deity, and as this sort of holding this particular progenitor role at one point in the divine genealogy. So yeah, we have to look at that closely. And Josephus wanted to start off with a passage from Hesiod, right? Josephus?
Yeah, obviously, this is probably the version of the myth that we're most familiar with in Europe or in European, European-derived countries. I don't know how to say in the Western world in general, and it's pretty straightforward. The Greek version actually is praiseworthy because the names are just the Greek words for heaven and earth, or sky and earth, if you will. So this is actually interesting. We actually see that various branches of the Indo-European linguistic family have different words to say sky or heaven. And we see that the word for heaven in Greek, Uranos, is obviously not related to the word for sky in Sanskrit, which is Dyaus, but that the deity representing sky is always named with the actual word meaning sky. And the same is actually seen with the goddess of the earth, Gaia in ancient Greek, and Prithivi in Sanskrit. So we again see that the common noun of the thing is also the name of the deity corresponding to it. So here is the easier passage. The context is obviously that Gaia and Uranus, so heaven and earth, have copulated, have united, and have begotten the Titans and other children. But Uranus, the sky, does not want these children to be born. So their mother, the earth, asks if any one of them is willing to essentially exact revenge. This is also kind of a pun. Actually, I'm going to take the Greek text. If I can find the actual Greek word for vengeance, it sounds somewhat similar to the word for titan. If I can find it. Okay. Tisaimeta. The root of this word, T, we also find other forms in which instead of an S, the second consonant is another T, so it's kind of reminding the sound of the word Titan. Obviously, Kronos, or Cronus, as we may know him in English, or Saturn, if we go by the Latin equivalent, is the only one who accepts the mother's proposal. And so, obviously, his mother rejoices and provides him with the harpe. Here we see it, the basically scythe that we all see in iconography. It's somewhat unclear. We don't usually see it when describing tools used by humans. It's kind of standard to see harpe as the scythe of Saturn, essentially. So what happens is that Uranus is united in love with his wife, the Earth, once again. Obviously, as we should already know, the Earth is also the sky's mother in the Greek version. We will see how this is different maybe in the Vedic version, but at any rate. So basically, the son, so Pais here means child, but obviously here is referring to Cronus, gets up and using his left hand, obviously the left hand is heavily connotated. Obviously, you would not want to use your right hand to do something so heinous as to castrate your father, but grabs his father with the left hand, and holding the scythe in the right hand, he cuts off the genitals of his father. Now, it's very interesting. The word for genitals in Greek is meidea, but the same word meidea can also mean mind or intellect. And it's sort of clear that Hesiod, in the structure that he gives to his poem, the Theogony, is highlighting a shift from the meidea of the god Uranus, so the genitals of the god of the sky, essentially, to the meidea of Zeus. And in the case of Zeus, these meidea are actually not to be understood as genitals, but to be understood as his counsel, his mind, his will, if one wills. And so this is kind of part of Hesiod's point that Zeus is somehow an organizer of the cosmos and a bringer of justice, as opposed to the more chaotic and unruly forces of the previous generations. And so, especially this Uranus, who obviously is not doing the father's job, he's not letting his children be born, and then Kronos kind of repeats the same mistake by swallowing his own children after they are born. So obviously, this action by Cronus, so cutting off the genitals, does result in the fall of blood. Here we can see a list of children that are born from this blood that is dropped onto the earth. So we have Erinus. These are the goddesses of vengeance. Obviously, they are usually associated with avenging crimes within the family. So obviously, they might want to avenge the fact that the father Uranus, the sky, has been castrated by his own son. Then we have the giants or gigantes in Greek. The name gigantes probably means, if we look at etymology, modern linguistic etymology, something like the begetters, right? Uh, but the common etymology in antiquity was the ones who are begotten from the earth. So an attempt to connect Gaia with the word for giants, gigantes, who are her children. Then the other children that are born from this union are the Meliae nymphs. These are essentially associated with the ash trees. Obviously, I don't need to remind you of the Germanic Asker and Embla, but anyway, these names are also begotten from this union. And then, obviously, as many more people will know, the genitals of the sky god falling into the sea eventually generated some sort of foam. Foam in Greek is apros. And so this foam eventually grew into the shape of the goddess Aphrodite, or the Roman equivalent Venus, the goddess of love. And here Hesiod gives us a nice description of this sort of mass floating around from around the island of Cyprus and Cythera, and so this explains why these places are cult centers of this goddess, and she's obviously known with epithets that somehow derive from these islands. So that kind of gives us the basic outline of the myth, the idea that the sky god and the earth goddess are united in one way or another, and in their union, they are separated by one of their sons, or at any rate another deity. It doesn't necessarily have to be a son. If we will have time for this, we might even look into the Sumerian version. Sumerian genealogies can be pretty messy, so Enlil is sometimes a son, a brother, or completely unrelated, or very distantly related to the sky god and the earth goddess. It's not crucial for him to be a son, but it's crucial for him to separate the union of heaven and earth, sky and earth, and this sort of maims and mutilates, in this specific case, castrates the sky god. And this also results, paradoxically, in the birth of more deities, more children from this union.
Right, that's a great summary. Thank you. And so one of the key issues that I always bring up in trying to look at the parallel that we're talking about here is what are the actual myths of the Vedic Dyaus? And so I think somehow this has to become sort of the reflexive point to bring up if when this question is when this particular question is at issue, is, you know, what is Dyaus's, who does Vedic Dyaus parallel? if someone is insisting that it is Zeus primarily, the question has to be asked, what are the Vedic myths of this Dyaus in the first place? And so Josephus, I'll just rhetorically raise this to you. What narrative myths do you know of Dyaus from the Rig Veda on its own, isolated?
Well, obviously, we don't really have much narrative about Dyaus in the Rig Veda. He's pretty much a minor deity, and most of the time he's invoked by the side of Prithivi, so by the side of the earth. And this actually frustrated early Indo-European scholars a lot throughout the early days of comparative mythology from an Indo-European perspective, because linguists obviously noticed that the names of Zeus and Dyaus are formal matches. They could be said to have exactly the same Indo-European origin, but they were frustrated by the fact that they actually didn't have any material about Dyaus that somehow parallels material of Zeus. So obviously some scholars tried to find similarities, but they are all pretty generic, being generically associated with the sky or identified with the sky, and being generically a father figure or a progenitor figure. I mean, these are
Right.
interesting, but they're not exclusive and not particularly decisive, as far as I can tell. If one needs to do comparative mythology, I think that a more structural approach is better in trying to understand what exactly does this deity do in context. So Dyaus and Zeus are pretty different, especially if taken in context, if looking at narratives, looking at pretty much anything that isn't extremely generic or their name.
Yes, and the thing is, the name is always going to be so powerfully hypnotic in this comparison. It seems to be insisting that there must be a shared root there. So it's kind of, if you have a situation where two names have come from a shared linguistic origin, but there has been some kind of shift, where an offshoot of that linguistic origin has been attached to one deity type in the Vedic case, and then a derivative of that, shared linguistic origin has been shifted, or I mean, rather, the shift has probably happened in the Sanskrit case, as we've discussed, but and then you have a different deity though, where that derivative name is attached in the Greek case. Most people are not prepared to um, to kind of be ready for that sort of possibility, and so it's hard to get around the strength of the linguistic parallel. But I think that's why it really has to be brought up. What are you basing this off in narrative, in mythic narrative terms, um, to really show that this isn't just a linguistic happenstance, a linguistic coincidence. I think the proponents of equating Dyaus and Zeus have to show that they, have thought it all the way through, and that they aren't just relying on, that they are prepared for the possibility that some kind of shift could have happened. You have to always be looking at both sides of all the possibilities of what could happen. And yeah, anyways, we know that can kind of be a obstruction to the conversation. It can be a conversation ender if people simply only care about the way these two names coincide, because they do coincide. Um, but anyways, the issue is, most people just don't know the mythology of Dyaus in the Vedas, and And part of that is that there are only a couple of narrative myths. And the primary one is that he is in this unity with Mother Earth. And Dyaus and Mother Earth, Prithivi, are referred to in this compound name, Java Prithivi, more times in the Rig Veda than they are even referred to individually. So this is why I say in my other video that Java Prithivi, this compound of earth and sky, is actually the default or primary way that Dyaus is even referred to in the Rig Veda. So it's kind of his default form is in this unity, this double being in a sense. If you think of Java Prithivi as a unity earth sky, it is like they're a single deity, hermaphroditic deity almost. And we can play this out through the parallels and see that this unity of earth and sky could be depicted as a marriage, or rather an abusive marriage, a sexual assault, as in the case of Uranus, this sort of unity, or it can be depicted as actually a hermaphroditic unity potentially, and that this sort of imagery can oscillate or can just be, depending on the tradition, it can be represented slightly differently.
Yeah, precisely on this note, obviously in the narrative of the separation of sky and earth, Hesiod obviously presents them as being separated by their son. But then later on in the Theogony and elsewhere, we see the same two deities, sky and earth, acting as a sort of inseparable couple, giving out prophecies together. So obviously, we still see something similar to Dhyava Prithivi, the unity in Vedic material, essentially. They are still very much closely connected, close-knit, and they still might be invoked together or give answers together, which is obviously fitting with the idea of their unity being the crucial point. We see nothing like that with Zeus. Zeus obviously has his own female partners, his many wives. Multiple wives are legitimately wedded at the same time. Actually, none of them is a very strong earth goddess parallel. Some people have tried to use the name Demeter as sort of evidence that she's an earth goddess.
Yeah.
But the first part of her name probably is connected to a word for cereal, so it's not really a word for earth in ancient Greek.
Right.
And the name Semele has been tentatively explained as a name for earth, but this is also linguistically very weak and unlikely. So Zeus does not really have an earth goddess as his usual partner. And even when he's paired with a female deity, which happens a lot in mythology and in Celtic practice in ancient Greece, we still see nothing close to the inseparable unity of Dyaus and Prithivi, or of Uranus and Gaia in much of Greek mythology. And actually, a very interesting trace of this original unity is also left in linguistics in Latin. There's a great hypothesis. There are papers by Weiss and others about this. In Latin, essentially, the word for heaven, caelum, is usually neuter. However, it has a masculine plural, caeli. This has been explained because linguistically, caeli was originally a dual. And so it probably originated as an elliptic dual, essentially a way to say heaven and earth. And it kind of stuck around even when it was no longer understood as such. So this is probably evidence that there was an Indo-European conception, a very strongly rooted conception of heaven and earth as a couple, a unity that essentially could not be separated. And this was expressed linguistically by the dual number, if it was possible. in Sanskrit, the dual number is very much productive. And in fact, that's why you see Dyava, Prithivi, that is kind of a dual declension. In Latin, it's more vestigial, but it's still there, and it's pretty much clearly there as a sort of linguistic evidence enshrined in the shape of the language, but pointing to a mythological or at the very least cosmological conception of Indo-Europeans.
Right. And Steen Fox asks the question, so the divine male and divine female on the grandest scale. So this is an interesting issue to bring up because I do want to clarify something based on this. It's hard to discuss this without, you don't want to like diminish or overly speak negatively about this deity, because I think that's a mistake. But in the depictions, Dyaus isn't really the grandest scale divine male. He embodies a certain progenitive father, obviously fatherly role, sort of archetypically, and he is at a certain point in the genealogy of the gods. Among the worldly gods, he's toward the beginning of that sequence, but he's later than a lot of the really primordial esoteric gods, so to speak. And really, what I want to emphasize, what has to be emphasized, is that Mother Earth and Father Sky, this Uranus or Dyaus, is really the material world in some sense. Obviously, they are deities, so they are the deities of that sort of manifest the material dimensions, the dimensions of the material world. So there's obviously paradox in the sense that they are gods, but they are the embodied heavens and sky of this visible or material mortal realm. They specifically are the shell of the world egg. So the world egg is created by higher deities, and it is made of like a type of matter or something that becomes matter in some sense, and that is what they are. Obviously, there is the concept of sort of the hard dome sky, the ancient view of the skies, the heavens being a hard dome, and that is kind of Uranus or Dyaus in opposition to his other half, the female half, which is Earth, and that being the earthly element, which is matter, or at least brings forth, manifests matter on this material realm. So yeah, it's difficult to discuss because you can always consider that these deities have higher esoteric essences in themselves prior to how they manifest. But in their mythic role, where they manifest, Dyaus is manifesting the top of the earth, the world egg, which is the material sky, and the Mother Earth is the material earth. So in that sense, they do symbolize, they do embody the divine male and female. It's kind of unavoidable. They are an archetype of that, but there are more primordial dualisms of that divine male and female. So I wouldn't say it's on the grandest scale. That's kind of the quibble I'm making there. Does that seem to track with you, Josephus?
Yeah, I actually have two comments on the matter. So one on the kind of double nature of these sky and earth deities as both spiritual and material things and essences. It's actually a passage from Varro on the book De Lingua Latina, so the book on Latin language. But actually, it's a book filled with religious and esoteric kind of questions, other than strictly linguistic questions. And the author himself thinks of etymology as a sort of ritual activity and says that the highest degree of etymology is only to be discussed inside a temple. So what he says is that heavens are the places above and the places of the gods, and earths are the places below and the places of humans. So he's essentially admitting both a physical dimension, heaven and earth, as physical places, and that is very clearly the usual way to use the words heaven and earth, but also the distinction of heaven and earth as spiritual distinction. So the distinction between a place of the gods. Obviously, gods have no fixed place. That's kind of the doctrine that every ancient writer agrees upon. Well, maybe not every writer. Epicurus would probably have different opinions, but most authors still kind of agree that the gods have no fixed place. So it's obviously a very spiritual distinction. Maybe the same place can be a heaven in the moment when deities are invoked, and an earth in the moment when humans are in that place, for instance.
Right.
Then another note, connecting back to the comment from Stein Folks, on the fact that Dyaus and Prithivi can be understood as divine masculine and divine feminine. This is true, obviously, but it's also more complex, incredibly. This has actually been argued by Nick Allen, so you can maybe find his articles on the issue. I think the article was about Proto-Indo-European proto-philosophy. And what Allen notices is that the word Dyaus in Sanskrit can be used as masculine or feminine. And the same is true for the word Akasha, which is kind of a synonym, a later synonym that sometimes takes the place of Dyaus in later texts. And at the same time, we also see that Prithivi, as the female goddess of the earth and wife of Dyaus, is also sometimes replaced by Prithu, a male deity of the earth, who is a friend and nothing more than a friend to Dyaus, who is also male, often in these narratives when Dyaus and Prithu and other elemental deities appear together. In Rome, we also have such kind of situation. Caelus is always masculine, as far as I can see, but we do have Dies, the deity of day, of daytime and daylight, whose gender is unclear, is sometimes presented as masculine or as feminine. And we do have especially both a female earth deity named Tellus and a male deity of the earth named Tellumo. So probably it's safe to say that yes, they are masculine and feminine, but being a sort of unity, they end up somehow confusing each other's gender,
Yes.
right? They end up sort of being undefined in this aspect, if one wills.
Yes, and as I've mentioned before, this happens several times in the Rig Veda, in the Vedas, that you'll have Prithivi who rains down with her clouds in one passage. It's like this confusion of, she's part of Dyaus, and then you have like the feminine form of Dyaus. Like you have Dyaus referred to as if it's a goddess, but I forget the form of the name in that
I
image. But
think also that in some passages they are referred to as the two sisters. So
yes,
Dyaus
all
and
this
Prithivi.
strange. There's
Yeah,
just multiple strange confusions, as if they can be kind of interchanged, and they can switch roles, switch genders between one another. Because if you're looking at this as sort of a primordial unity, really, and in a serious sense, then that makes sense. And yeah, I go into those specific passages in the video on Father Sky. Did you have anything else to add on that?
well, I think that we have elaborated enough on this. Maybe, I don't know, we can move on to
Yeah,
other examples in other mythologies.
that
And
sounds
maybe
good.
I think that the Germanic kind of issue needs to be addressed. Obviously, Ymir um, is another really that has often been misunderstood by comparative mythologists. We have already a video on the channel about that, but maybe we can kind of give some indication on why Ymir can parallel the Greek Uranus and overall this
Yeah.
kind of
Okay. I'll start on that. So we were discussing how it's not quite, to me it doesn't quite chime to say that Uranus or Dyaus even is the grandest scale male deity or symbol of deity of maleness, partly because he has this particular role as the material shell. He's not the most primordial, but also it's sort of unavoidable that his primary narrative myth, and you see this in multiple branches, is that he is kind of portrayed negatively. He's kind of in this, and you can't take this too far because a sort of sexual assault or a liaison of a male deity upon a female deity, however you want to phrase it, that obviously is esoterically burdened and layered, and you have this with Zeus himself, of course, his multiple female, partners and different things that have esoteric dimensions to them. So, but in the telling and in the representation of the deity, there is a heavy emphasis on this deity type being a perpetrator of something negative, and being kind of punished by this avenger and attacked, cut away from Mother Earth, cut away from his female aspect or his female sexual partner or whatever. So that is a key part, because this is like his myth and that is his role in the myth. It becomes a dominant note, I think, in his mythos. So and this just goes back to what I was sort of hinting towards, and that I kind of don't even know like how much I can read of this sort of a hymn on YouTube, because it's so strongly worded. And but I do have, let me see if I can share the screen here. Just a moment.
Incidentally, greetings to Arno Furor Poeticus, who is commenting and thankfully helping clarify concepts to people who are commenting.
Yes. So we have, to sort of answer the hanging question about Dyaus, is like he has the myth, his narrative mythos is that he is unified with Earth and that he is divided from Earth. But the problem in the Vedic text is that there are multiple references to Earth and sky being divided, and there are multiple deities who are said to have done this in some sense. Whether it is Indra is a prominent one to have held apart or split sky and Earth, separated them, or there's a mention of Varuna doing something similar, and also Vishnu. And so, and there is no explicit mention that Rudra has done this dividing of sky and Earth. But I think the problem is that, and as we discussed before, Cronus, who divides Uranus and Gaia, seems to be actually the Rudra type, as this parallel kind of finally clinches, I think, once it's understood. Because in all of these other Vedic mentions of the divider of sky and Earth, first of all, they can't all be Cronus. They can't all be the equivalent of the European divider of sky and Earth, is what I'm trying to say. Therefore, you have to kind of weigh the actual narrative going on around this event and compare the details more closely to find out what has happened in the transmission. And I think the key issue is none of these other figures are the avenging attacker of Sky. So I think the real mythos that kind of was holding this mytheme together is that there is a sexual assault, a violent sexual pairing of the male father Sky that is happening. Secondly, that this is avenged by an avenging deity, and so that deity is the attacker of Sky in a righteous avenging sense. And finally, clinching this is that the seed of Father Sky falls in some sense and gives rise to specific ancestors of humans, most importantly. So, as we mentioned with the Uranus myth, the Melii related to the ash tree, the nymphs of the ash tree is what they are, the Melii. That, of course, echoes Asker and Embla, the ash humans, but also the Melii are ancestors of a breed of humans, of a sort of tribe, or they are one of the human ancestor figures. So this all lines up with only one mythos in the Vedic mythology, and it is not Indra dividing sky and earth, or Varuna or Vishnu, because none of those have the details I mentioned. None of those are actually violently attacking Sky. They're just, so to me, this means that these other deities, in some sense, their divine presence held apart the skies at some level. It was sort of a division on multiple levels. They all played a role, or what have you, or it could be later developments just sort of repeating this motif. But there's really only one righteous attacker of Sky who is in the act of copulating, forcefully with a female aspect of himself, so to speak. And then the seed that falls from this interrupted act gives rise to ancestors of humans, and that only occurs in Rig Veda 10.61 and Rig Veda 1.71, and it is Rudra who is the destroyer, and he is this righteous attacker of Sky in the middle of his violent sexual act. Now, the difficulty there is that, again, Rudra is never said to be the divider of Sky and Earth, so to speak, because in the Vedic version, Rudra is apparently attacking Dyaus while he is in union with his own female half in a much vaguer sense. So it's become more vague who the female deity is. It's so vague that in this hymn that I have on the screen, scholars aren't even sure what the deity is, or what the goddess is, who the goddess is, because it's just referred to as the daughter. Okay, so this goes back to what we were saying, how the genders and the roles, the exact labeling within this unity is unclear, especially when they're in unity. And
yes, there's also kind of a difference compared to the Greek situation where Gaia is the mother of Uranus. Although Orphic versions may have them as brother and sister rather than mother and son. So it's once again pointing to this sort of confused unity in which they are so closely united that saying who's the father and who's the daughter, or the mother and son, is kind of superfluous, even, I would say.
Exactly. And you see even in the Ironic version that it is that Earth is the mother of this comparable Dyaus derived type of deity who's in the comparable mythos. It's again like the Greek version, and even in the Ironic version, right nearby to the Vedics. But so you can see that there is this variation. But the other key that kind of brings it together is it is an unnamed daughter that he is in sexual union with, and when he gets attacked. But, and I'll bring this up here, this is the rest of the hymn. But after, when the seed falls that will become the ancestors of humans from this act, it falls into, essentially, symbolically, into the earth, into the womb of the earth, in a sense. So Earth as a goddess is present there still, and the seed is received by this earth, as if, sky being driven off, or them being driven apart in this act. Then Earth is named as her own deity, as sort of the conclusion of this. And so that is the Angirases, the fire priests, are born from the seed, and they are the ancestors of humans. So you have all these. You really have to look at these specific these specific details. Otherwise, you are just missing the most important parts of what this parallel is, and what you should be looking at. Yeah. So, do you think I should read any of this? I've kind of summarized it well enough.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know what the restrictions are on
Yeah.
reading explicit content, so I guess that people can read themselves.
Well, I already read
Also-
this. I already read this on a different video on the channel. So I don't know.
Okay, so you can either redirect to that, or I don't know, read it again. Obviously, notice how the things that we pointed out are kind of the same in the Greek and the Vedic version. So we have the idea of vengeance. The Greek verb tiso here is obviously the verb to avenge, and is used as a pun with the word titan, so the titan who avenges. Then obviously the seed of the sky god which falls on the earth in the Vedic version is paralleled by blood and foam in the Greek version, but we still have a pretty good parallel. So obviously all these details kind of help us assess which kind of myths we're talking about. As for Indra as a separator, I think that a part of this is that Indra is very closely associated with air, with the god Vayu and the band of Maruta, which are wind deities. So maybe it's just a way to say that the atmosphere is between heaven and earth. So it's kind of a naturalistic explanation. And also it possibly relates to a sort of ritual division. So there are different kinds of altars for different deities, depending on whether they are sky deities, atmosphere deities, and earth deities. This is true in both Vedic Indian religion and ancient Roman religion and ancient Greek religion. We can only speculate that it's also true for pretty much every other Indo-European tradition. So it's probably safe to say that this kind of Dyaus Indra Prithivi structure in the Vedas, which does not have the developed narrative that we see with Rudra and the unnamed daughter of the sky, well, is obviously pointing to a kind of different context. Now, there is a comment that I would like to highlight by Brian M., which says, repeating events can also be ritual recreation to renew the universe, likely when blending with new peoples, and they were just blending a new take of the same story by the Bronze Age. Okay, that's partly, that could partly be relevant to the case of the Vedic tradition, but I think it's even more relevant, especially the first part of the comments, a ritual recreation to renew the universe, with the Umbrian parallel. Now, obviously, ancient Romans had their version of Saturn cutting off the genitals of Caelus, his father, the sky god, and separating him from Earth. However, some ancient Roman authors claimed that this was not originally a Roman myth. They probably said so partly because original pre-Hellenistic Roman mythology had kind of been forgotten, and partly because they were ashamed at the idea that they could, even if indirectly through mythology, incentivize and tolerate mutilation of one's father, which was severely punished in ancient Rome. However, we do have in Umbrian tradition, which is an Italic tradition, so closely related to the ancient Roman one, some New Year rites in which essentially there are ritual implements that are used to slice some sort of element which is probably representative of the sky-earth unity. And this division by these ritual implements is renewed every year. So every year is a sort of new creation myth repeated, a new separation of heaven and earth. Uh, well, I guess that maybe at the end of the year they are reunited and then they are redivided um, with the new year, which, unlike in Roman tradition and other traditions, in Umbrian tradition, probably coincided with the spring equinox. So the time when essentially the sun is in a sort of equipoise in heaven. So that's also very symbolic. And I think that, I don't know, this comment by Brian M kind of reminded me of this situation, of the Umbrian situation. Vice has written more extensively about this, so maybe look up his publications.
Interesting.
Another very interesting comment by Brian M is the last one. Sky, seeds, and fire sound a lot like Pansporia. Now, it's very interesting because sky, seed, fire, the sun, the mind are all pretty solidly associated with the idea of masculinity and divinity. At least in Roman tradition, that's pretty strong. But I think we have pretty strong parallels for this also in Vedic tradition. So that's very interesting. It's kind of a sort of connection that spans around. And obviously, this is counterbalanced by the earth goddess being associated maybe with menstrual blood or blood in general, and water as a sort of counterbalance to the male seed and the fire associated with the sky god in general.
Very good. Yeah. And let me just kind of continue with this, supporting what we've been saying with this Vedic hymn, because one of the other issues is this is essentially the main, or I almost like to say it's almost the only narrative, full-fledged narrative myth of Dyaus, Father Sky, in the Rig Veda, and that's extremely important. Like the weight of who Dyaus is entirely on this. You can't kind of get around this. One of the problems of people not knowing this about Dyaus when thinking about this comparison is that in the most widely available Rig Veda translation, the Griffith one, for example, this entire hymn is rendered in Latin. It is not translated into English because it is the most explicit, most sexually explicit and shocking hymn in the entire Rig Veda, essentially. So Griffith, translating in the late 19th century, in the Victorian era, it was too shocking to render into English at all. So most people who don't have, the Jameson and Brereton translation has only been with us since 2014 and is not widely easily accessible to most people. So basically, most people don't know this myth about Dyaus because, for one thing, it just wasn't even in the most widely easily accessible translation due to its nature. And but it is obviously, yes, it's like a shocking myth, but it's a shocking myth in the case of Uranus and Cronus too. But obviously, it's extremely important. So, and then this just highlights what we were saying, which is that the central myth of Dyaus has him in a negative kind of role. Obviously, he's also prayed to. He's also, they didn't have a problem with this sort of ambivalence because obviously he's an important deity. He brings down the rains that give life. His progenitive power and the fact that he symbolizes this progenitive role, that is, an important divinity. He also the sky in a lot of traditions is sort of witnesses, oaths and things like that, has a ceremonial role in that respect that is important. So this isn't to say this is a negative deity, but he is part of this what I went over in my last non-live stream video, this motif in the Indo-European mythos of this sort of progenitor god, having this violent liaison, sexual liaison with the daughter or the mother, this incestuous sort of archetypal, taboo, esoteric, just it is sort of the core of what is creation, what was the creative event, how was that mythically understood in Indo-European mythology, and it has this sort of violent core to it, and so playing that role, he has a negative or at least an ambivalent dimension to him, at least exoterically, or at least we could say colloquially rather than exoterically. But this filters into how the stories are told, especially if we aren't ancient people, we don't have the full tradition. Over the centuries, that negative side, if that dominates in the telling, in just the narrative tales we get, it can dominate what is thought of that particular deity. Uranus can seem in retrospect as only negative. The same thing happens with Mythology, essentially. In the Welsh version, he abuses his wife, he hits his wife, Bronwyn. It's been kind of changed to a violent blow, a violent hit, and that is to depict this same theme. One thing that kind of clinches, though, that this is the correct parallel, one of the most important parallels to bring into this is the Kalash parallel. I think it's the Kalash or Nuristani people, and we have a story of the dividing of sky and earth. Essentially, there is a cord that connects between earth and the palace of the sky. That's it's up there in the sky. It's like the palace of the sky. And there's a figure called Mandi or Mahandev. And Mandi is like a shortened version of Mahandev. And Mahandev is the Kalash name of this figure, but it's practically the same name as Mahadeva. It is from the same origin. Mahadeva being the most well-known epithet of Rudra. So it's very clear that this Mahandev or Mandi is the Kalash Rudra, and he much more explicitly severs the cord between earth and the sky palace. It's this cord that's covered in seed chaff. It's this very you can see sort of the sexual or the potential esoteric symbology there, this cord that is connecting them, and he severs them. So I think it's pretty obvious what's going on there. And the Kalash are there very close to the Vedic people. They're very close by. And so you have this kind of confirmation right next door that in this ancient tradition, somehow it was the Rudra type god who separated sky and earth. It's just been kind of blurred in that Vedic telling that we discussed. Instead of outright saying he separated sky and earth, instead he's separating sky from his daughter in the Vedic telling, and then Father Sky is driven off, as the hymn on the screen describes. He's driven off, and then Earth kind of remains as in the conclusion. So it's implied through the telling that this same sort of event is happening. But anyways, the Nuristani and Kalash one is key to this. Where is the Nuristani Kalash source located? I've tried to find this myth online and couldn't find it. So it is from like a scholarly summary of these tales, and I think it's a Michael Witzel publication.
Yes,
that you can
the
just
one
Google.
who studied it extensively.
Yeah.
Although earlier studies are also quoted by Dumézil, so they're nothing new under the sun, really.
Yeah. So I think if you search Witzel, Witzel, and then Kalash myths or something, it comes up on Google, and it's a freely available document that will come up on Google, and it just has short summaries of each of these tales. So hopefully you can find that. And so this negative portrayal, I just want to emphasize that it is there in the Vedic version. It's just that the Vedic tradition is much broader, much more has survived. Therefore, we have a really well-rounded, or a fairly well-rounded picture of Dyaus. Rather, his primary myth, he is in this sort of terrible role, and you could see that very negatively. But he is also, there's enough other material to show that he is prayed to and venerated and worshipped for all the wonderful things that that the sky is associated with. So it's much more complicated and ambivalent. But the same can be said for Uranus, for sure. In the Greek tradition, it is well-rounded enough that we can see both of those sides. However, the narrative myth is he's in a quite negative role. Then in the Welsh tradition, like I said, he's ambivalently portrayed throughout the tale, or he's even he's a king. He's making a marriage with Bronwyn, and there is sort of trying to make peace with him and all that. And then he takes Bronwyn away to Ireland, because they are from, Bronwyn is from Wales, and he takes them away to Ireland. Ireland is kind of just like the other place, and then he abuses Bronwyn, his wife. He makes her work in the kitchens, and then the three great blows of Ireland are sort of in the triads of Wales, describing the blows, the abuse that Matholwch gave to Bronwyn, and this is in the place of the sort of sexual violence, because then Efnisien, Nisien, Manawydan, and Bran, Vendighi Bran, have to come across the sea to Ireland to attack Matholwch and kill him. So that is the vengeance of Efnisien leading the way, sparking this crisis, this conflict. Efnisien really drives this war onward and causes it to really come about. Efnisien is that avenging Rudra, the hostile destroyer. His name means the hostile one, and Efnisien is that in that Rudra role they go and fight against Matholwch in a war and end up killing him. After which Bronwyn goes and basically just dies of a broken heart, and they bury her in the earth, symbolically, in a sense, because she is the earth goddess. She was made to work in the kitchens. I think that's interesting because it's like a food production wink by Matholwch. And so anyways, that is the same. You can see, once you kind of have that lens, you can really see that Efnisien doing this is very much the same as Cronus having this avenging role on this abusive marriage. And then so that is consistent, that negativity that is kind of around this mythos. And I think it just is much more emphasized, much more heavily made the sole identity of this sky in the Germanic case. So I think we should go to Ymir, or Ymir, because, as we said, kind of the anchor point of this god type really is that he is the sky itself. This doesn't change in the case of Uranus or Kailus. We can only guess at that particular fact with Matholwch and the Irish case, which we can also go into. But between the Greek and Roman and Vedic, this deity is the sky itself, and it doesn't have to do with what his name is, because that shifts between branches. But whatever the word for sky is in a given branch, that becomes this deity's name. He doesn't change underneath that name. It is, like we said before, kind of, there was a shift linguistically in the Vedic Sanskrit tradition, most likely, which caused this root word to take on the meaning more emphatically of sky, this word Dyaus. That then became his name because he is the sky. That's kind of what you think, right, Josephus? That there was this root word shared. this root word shared by the Zeus type, essentially. But in Sanskrit, in that original Proto-Indo-European form of this root, it didn't really mean sky. It meant shining or something related to
probably
that.
daytime or daytime sky, something along
Daytime.
those lines,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah, it
And
wasn't necessarily the word for the sky, and that particular meaning developed in probably just in Sanskrit. Is that what you think?
yeah, probably just in Vedic Sanskrit. It probably not even Iranian languages have
Yeah.
parallels for that. So it's probably a relatively later development. Obviously, still early in the absolute chronology, but not an Indo-European original thing. Um, so it's possible that the etymology, kind of the semantics shifted, right? So it went from meaning daytime sky or daylit sky into more generally sky. And obviously, as we see in Greek and in other branches, the name for the sky god is simply the current word for sky. There's
Yes.
no more depth to it than that, as opposed to maybe a name like Zeus or Latin Jupiter, which is not the name of anything else. It's not a common noun to denote any natural element. It's solely the name of a deity. So yeah, I would contend that Dyaus in Proto-European was most likely associated with the sovereign god,
Hmm.
and probably, I mean, I like to think, maybe it's also my bias, but I like to think that the Roman version is most conservative. Jupiter is obviously Deus Pater. Pater means father, but Deus is the real name. So it's kind of this sovereign deity in general. And then in Roman religion, we see him having at least three hypostases. He obviously has many more, but three main ones. Deus, which is the god of daytime sky, Summanus, also known as Nocturnus, the god of nighttime sky, and Veiovis, who is the god of the underworld. And we see something very similar in Greece with Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades to some degree, and also in India with Mitra, Varuna, and Yama. But we probably should make another video on this
Yes.
topic.
Yeah, we can go into
The
that more in the Zeus
yeah,
video. I just wanted to point out.
yeah, the point is,
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like the Roman situation is most conservative, and it's also interesting that Greeks and Romans have etymologically related names for the sovereign god, Zeus and Jupiter. Obviously, Greeks and Romans are related as being part of the same Indo-European family, but especially scholars who use the tree model of Indo-European languages tend to think that Greek is more closely related to Sanskrit on a phylogenetical level than it is to Latin. Then obviously there's later influence that kind of brought Greek and Latin languages a bit closer, especially with Latin calquing Greek constructions.
Right.
So, if these branches, which are supposedly phylogenetically more distant, can agree that this is the name of the sovereign god and not of the father sky, I feel like this is an important piece of the puzzle.
Hmm.
Now, obviously, proponents of the Zeus Dyaus equation um, kind of have their counter argument, basically assuming that the Roman Jupiter is was basically influenced in everything about him uh, based on the Greek Zeus, and that the Greek Zeus himself was influenced by Near Eastern deities such as Baal or something maybe like Enlil among the Sumerians, so some other deities that are not Indo-European. And this, in the opinion of some earlier scholars, but not even modern scholars tend to agree with that. In the opinions of these Zeus equals Dyaus proponents, essentially what it does is removing any layer of native mythology to Zeus other than his name and being a generic sky-related, father-related figure, and also does the same removal of everything, of every traditional element from Jupiter among the Romans. And I feel like if your theory requires both Greeks and Romans to have abandoned basically everything about their native mythologies and to have adopted everything about their native mythologies from somewhere else, probably there's a problem with the theory. You probably should look into other hypotheses
Yes.
on, and especially if the parts that you remove, so being a sovereign god and some specific myths and rituals such as oath rituals and guest friendship rituals, and you take all of that and you see that Romans and Greeks agree on that. So probably if the name Deus was used by Indo-Europeans to refer to a god, I think it's very likely that it was referring to a sovereign god, and that some other name that sadly got lost was used to refer to Father Sky.
Well, I also, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but so the Proto-Indo-European root shared between Zeus and Dyaus is it Dyaus?
Yes.
Dyaus, something like that. Pronunciation probably different, but anyways, I believe, and I didn't review Lot-Motz's article. I think everyone should just read Lot-Motz's the Indo-European Sky God, I think it's called. Lottemotz, and she shows very thoroughly the divergence of the meanings in these words and how I believe the Proto-Indo-European word Deus doesn't really have. There's no sign that it would have meant sky. That it has only essentially a broader sense of shiningness, and that the sense of sky in the derived word Dyaus, or the name and its variations in Sanskrit, only that name and its variations actually has the meaning sky to it. So I think if we can say that the Proto-Indo-European word, based on the evidence that she brings forth, that the Proto-Indo-European word probably didn't have the sense of sky, particular. It wasn't particularly narrowed down to sky. At least it was a broader term that supports this concept, because we kind of can see that in every branch, the name for this god is just whatever the name for sky is. It's not some broad. You don't have any case where the name for the embodied sky is a broad term meaning shiningness or whatever. It's always the focused name for the sky. So yeah, would you would you say that's close to accurate, that the Proto-Indo-European word doesn't really show? You kind of have to reconstruct that based on the derived words in different branches, of course, what that sense would have even been. But that's what she does in that article. She kind of shows that the meaning of sky is really isolated to the Sanskrit, and that it's really, you don't really have that in the other branches. Therefore, the Proto-Indo-European one, you would have to make a big stretch to attach sky as a specific meaning of Deus, Proto-Indo-European.
Yeah, also on a note, just for context, early scholars of Indo-European languages, as soon basically as Indo-European studies began, sort of assumed that Sanskrit was the most conservative language, and that if Sanskrit and the other languages disagreed, it was because Sanskrit was the prior one and the other languages degenerated. Modern scholars have finally come to realizing that actually it's not the case. Sanskrit can be as innovative as any other language. Some aspects of Sanskrit language are not the same as Proto-Indo-European and are simply due to internal developments, or sometimes developments through contact with Dravidian languages. So yeah, early scholars always give Sanskrit priority. Modern scholars tend to weigh the evidence, such as the scholar Lotte has done, and so
Yes.
essentially, you everyone can just read her article. I think it's
Yes. I'm
pretty
gonna.
pretty much. Yeah,
It's
lock
very
them all.
thorough. It's very thorough. Sorry, that ran together there, but you get the point. And yeah, it really shows this point that it's the meaning of sky is isolated to the Sanskrit. You can this really supports what Josephus was saying, that most likely the Sanskrit, the sense diverged somehow. The semantic uh, meaning, it diverged in the Sanskrit, and so yes, it is sort of um, overwhelming. It's an overwhelming similarity or identical, formal match between Zeus and Dyaus of the Vedas. However, you have to trace back the history of how this developed, and that's what Lotmats did. You have to actually look that the meaning actually changed, most likely, along this kind of route. So that really supports it supports the fact that Jupiter and Zeus probably have the actual closer to the Indo-European name, and that the Vedic Dyaus, the meaning of sky just changed. Words in a language change, so the moniker probably shifted. That would explain this at least. So moving on to the Germanic, the Norse Ymir. So this everything we've been saying kind of builds to this difficult parallel, because Ymir is much more heavily depicted as negative, and practically he's a giant. He's practically monstrous. But if you actually look at the myth, um, and especially if you have established that Odin is the equivalent of Rudra, if you read Chris Kershaw's book, The One-Eyed God, Odin and the Indo-Germanic Mannerbund, if you read the other arguments, there is a strong and growing body of evidence that Odin is most directly comparable to Rudra, and it really is. Odin is doing the same sort of thing. He's avenging something upon Ymir, which is rather vague in this telling. However, Ymir is a hermaphroditic unity. He is rather a hermaphroditic being. He reproduces out of himself by rubbing his body parts together in some sort of disgusting way. That's basically all that we know about what he does, and then Odin attacks him. Odin and his brothers then explicitly lift the sky from the earth, the heavens from the earth, and immediately after this, they turn the lower part of Ymir's body into the earth, and the waters of the earth. His blood becomes the rivers and oceans, and his bones become the mountains. So his body is earth. That earth becomes Jord, becomes renamed as the female Jord. So if you think about this, his body always was the female deity Jord. His head, his skull becomes the sky. In the bardic tradition, the epithets for the sky are just Ymir's. It's something like skull of the giant, or Ymir's skull. It is the canonical name for the sky in the whole Norse tradition. It is Ymir's skull, essentially. So Ymir's skull is the poetic word for the sky, the poetic word, that is, of course, in the bardic tradition. And you can see it happening in the myth. His head and his brains become the clouds of the skies. He quite literally is the sky, and his body is the earth, becoming its own deity, becoming female. And so you can see that when he rubs his body together, his male aspect, in a sense, one aspect of his self is reproducing with another aspect of himself. It seems to be, if you put this together with the parallel, that this could be the reason why Odin attacks him, other than just wanting to create the world. Of course, he wants to create. Odin and his brothers want to create the world, but obviously Ymir he has this negative sense. He's described as, I can't remember if Snorri uses the word evil. I think something similar to that. And that he is not a god. He's very heavily, especially in Snorri, he's very heavily, emphasize that he's evil. Snorri, of course, he's summarizing traditions, and there is a Christian sort of context in the time period. That's a complicated topic. I don't want to say that he's Christianizing everything, but his portrayal of Ymir as purely evil, there could be sort of a later weight to that, but there doesn't have to be either. I think, it's entirely possible that there are deep roots to Ymir being this disgusting, sort of having this negative aspect, that it goes back to this core negative role of Father Sky, which is that he has this sexual violence that is disgusting, and that is Ymir reproducing out of his own female aspect. There's something repellent about it, even though it is the core of procreation, core of creation. It's all right there happening. It still has to be attacked by the avenging god, and Rudra, or Odin, is the god of the cosmic order. He is upholding cosmic order by attacking the sky. So once again, the core of this myth is who is the attacker of the sky. The attacker of the sky, just like Cronus on Uranus, is Odin on Ymir. It's just, there's no getting around the fact that Odin is the attacker of the sky. Right after that, Sky, who is Ymir, has done this disgusting progenitive act, then separates Sky from Earth, exactly like the separating of Sky from, the separating of Uranus from Gaia, rather. So you have the same myth themes, if you can get past the slight change of emphasis. And this goes back to the fact that Java Prithivi in the Vedas, and probably in the Proto-Indo-European tradition, could oscillate between being seen as a single hermaphroditic unity or a marriage between the two halves. So that hermaphroditic unity version or emphasis obviously carried through into the Norse version. Therefore, he's depicted as a giant with his head as sky, and body becomes the earth goddess when divided. So Josephus, can you pick up from that any points you have?
Yeah, I was thinking that maybe the negativity portrayal of these figure, or these couple of figures, could also be related to either the idea of passivity, right? They are sort of matter that needs to be shaped by the will of another deity.
Absolutely.
And this strongly contrasts with the willingness and the activity, and in some way the eagerness of a god such as Kronos, or the avenging fury of a god like Rudra, and the willingness to create the world of a god like Odin. And then also another thing that could be related to the negative portrayal is the fact that ultimately these either hermaphroditic unity or couple of beings is ultimately part of the natural gods, and especially looking into the epic portions of Indo-European mythologies, so the portions concerning human heroes at war, we kind of see this sort of distinction between the natural deities, which are unpredictable and need to be defeated, by societal deities, the deities associated with the Dumizzilian functions, essentially, the deities who bring order, who bring society, who bring harmony. And this can also be kind of seen in the theogony.
Yes.
So the gradual shift from the media of Uranus, so the genitals kind of seen as irrationality, as chaos, as matter that has no logic behind it, eventually evolving all the way to the media of Zeus. So the mind of Zeus, the ability to give a shape, organization, order, and justice to reality. That is pretty much what could have led to characterizing this deity as negative or evil, even if we want. Obviously, it's not really adherence to Christianity or attempt to make myths more acceptable to a Christian audience probably did not help, but at the same time, it's probably not the main responsible at any rate.
Yeah, it probably isn't, because Ymir is obviously there in the Poetic Edda, and the emphasis on his negative traits don't seem to be as strong. However, kind of there's kind of slim evidence even of that, and so it does seem to be there in some sense, and it's just emphasis. It's just kind of reiterated strongly by Snorri. That's all. But it does seem to kind of be there, and we can see it. We can see the basis of it. And like you said, I think that's a really good way to put it. Is that he is a deity of this earlier stratum that's it's sort of asocial. The asocial deities. Even Uranus is obviously the father of Cronus, who is the Titan of Titans, and then of course the other Titans and are the giants. Did you say that the gigantes are also the children of Uranus?
Yes, they are begotten
Yes.
after the severing of his genitals from
Hmm.
dripping blood.
Right.
Also, the hundred-handed creatures are sons of Uranus and Gaia, and also three of the Cyclopes.
Right.
So these are kind of monstrous beings, right? They are beings that do not respect the human shape, which is regarded as a more perfect and balanced shape. The Cyclops, especially, are one-eyed, and obviously having an odd number of eyes can be a good thing in some specific cases with some deities and in some traditions. But in the Cyclops case, it's kind of symbolizing their lack of sight and of
Hmm.
foresight, their lack of civilization, right?
Right.
So it's a negative trait.
Right. And so this obviously really strongly supports the parallel with Ymir because Ymir is the father of the Jotuns, and the giants, and so Uranus is not only father of the Titans, he's also father of the giants in his mythos. So this is another just alignment that's really hard to avoid, and it kind of shows that they're in the same role of being the progenitor of these these more asocial or more materially associated. I don't know. Would you say they're associated with matter in that sense that you mentioned, or just sort of asociality, the giants and the like? Maybe just asociality.
Yeah, this also, I think, really helps us to tie it also with the issue of mortal parallels, such as Bhishma in the Vedic epics and Sarpedon in the Iliad. They're both fighting on the losing side, which is the side of asociality. So the side that needs to be conquered by the sociality, by the society of gods who establish the Indo-European order. Essentially, that's kind of the point of these
Hmm.
epics.
Yeah, yeah, and let's see. We have this comment here that the Germanic pantheon are often of Jotun descent, and so yeah, that's important, and it's also important because so are the gods are also descended of the Titans of Cronus the Titan. So Cronus the Titan is the father of Zeus, who's father of the gods. So it all does align.
Also, in Vedic mythology, genealogies in the Vedas can be a bit murky, but usually we see that the earlier deities, the eldest deities, are classified as Asura. And the
Right.
Asura tend to be good parallels to the Jotun and the Titans in their respective traditions. So we
Yeah.
still see that
Well,
gods
yeah.
are ultimately
Maybe
the
not a
sons and
yeah.
daughters of something that is a bit less civilized, even though equally primordial and equally powerful and equally divine in some way. Just divine
Mhm.
in a way that is asocial, that is not strictly um,
Right.
within the order, essentially.
Right. And then you also have what I think is interesting is that it's always, at least through the comparisons of like Pouvel and Lincoln and the like, it's always been fairly obvious or well accepted that the Ironic Gaiomard is probably equal to Ymir in some way. Gaiomard being this primordial giant who is alongside a primordial cow, and they're both killed by the destroyer deity. Okay, this destroyer deity, Ahriman, I think we've discussed a bit that he is the demonized Rudra, this demonized Odin. But in any case, you have that same myth with Gaiomard, but Gaiomard's name means mortal life. And to me, this is potentially interesting because of the emphasis on mortality, that he is not only that he is like the source of life, but he's the source of mortal life, just like the shell of the egg that Java Prithivi is this material shell encompassing the newborn, the created world, the manifest material world. It's a limiting designation to be mortal life. It is, and so that kind of goes back to this underlying potential negativity could surround the fact that he is sort of this passively material dimension of the cosmos that has been created. That there is sort of a lingering sort of a negativity to bare matter that is not invested with the divine spark, that is not shaped by the divine will of a god like Odin, and that sort of thing. So anyways, I think that question of negativity has to be considered with this possible parallel to mortal life, this limitation that is inherent in this type. Yeah. Let's just touch on the Irish case if we can. Obviously, with Ymir, actually, we could spend a whole hour talking about the name of Ymir, which has been probably falsely glossed as meaning twin by some etymologists who seem, in my opinion, to be glossing over certain gaps that are crucial to this question, and reading into it the idea that he might parallel the divine twins, reading that into the etymology. And we've discussed this pretty endlessly. But yeah, do you want to touch on anything about that, or will that take too long?
Yeah, I mean, I will still obviously restate my proposed etymology for Ymir. There are other competing etymologies. Sometimes it is derived from the verb eumia, which means to scream. My proposed etymology is that it comes ultimately from the same root that also gives us words for twin in some Indo-European languages, but it is from a different ablaut grade and with a different suffix. So maybe if someone is more well versed in Indo-European linguistics, they can look into that deeper. But the point is that the root is the same, but it's declined in a different way. And so the way I would reconstruct it is yos, so with a syllabic M and then the suffix yos, which is a usual adjective form in suffix. So this would probably mean pair, and this is actually a very good formal match for Lithuanian jumis, which also means pair. Now there's a difference between being a twin, so being someone separate in a group of two, and being a pair, which is a unity of two things that form a unitary group, a pair, right? So Ymir as a pair makes sense mythologically, not only linguistically. He would be the pair that contains within himself both heaven and earth. The pair is later separated at the ends of Odin, but starts out as a hermaphroditic unity, as a sky-earth unity. And so this unity forms a pair. It's not a couple of twins. There is no twin involved in the story whatsoever. So I feel like my etymology, which obviously has already been discussed in the other video on this channel, maybe even more than one video.
Yes, please see the other video on this.
Yeah, it can be discussed more in depth. I'm more than happy maybe
on the Yemo and Manus. Yeah, the Yemo and Manus video.
Yeah, so I'm I'm maybe more than happy to maybe later write down the reconstructed forms in the comment if someone
Mhm.
requests it. But at any rate, it,
Yes,
if it means pair, it definitely does not mean twin. Like
does not mean twin like Gemini. Yeah.
linguistically, it doesn't really work that well. It's not a perfect formal match. It's a better formal match for the word meaning pair, and so this would perfectly make sense mythologically.
Mythologically, it's exact. It's exactly to what he is. Not only is it exactly to the only Dyaus myth that we discussed, that the Vedic Dyaus myth is this sexual violence and then being attacked and being the sky itself. That sums up what Dyaus actually is. That's exactly what Ymir is. I'm sorry to say, and so clearly he has no twin, like you said. It's just all this um, mirage, all this nonsense being brought in because um, it's similar to the word. It is derived from a shared root with the word for twin, with the Vedic Yama, but by these via these changes, like you said, that make it actually have a different formal character and to apparently uh, be more likely to mean pair or double, something like that, right? Double fruit pair. So he is the pair. He is the god who is the pair. He is the like the commenter said. It's almost like a pair of primordial pair of male and female in a sense in this neat package that is Ymir. So it perfectly sums him up with no waste. It is very Occam's razor is very favorable to this interpretation, I should say. So, unlike the opposing one, it's kind of it's something that we like to discuss. So please ask us questions about that topic in the future if you would like to. And I'd like to just jump over to the Irish topic, the Irish parallel, because it takes a few steps to understand where this is in the Irish mythology. It helped me to first interpret the Welsh version with Ethnician first, and to realize that you have this very similar myth type of, the Cronus type avenging deity attacking the abusive union, and that you have that in Ethnician, but he turns it into a war. In the Welsh version, it's depicted as a war. He leads the war against Matholwch, who's abusing Bronwyn, and in that war, he's specifically depicted with two brothers, which are Nisian and Manawydan, and also another brother, Bendigeid Bran, or Bran rather. And there is a specific scene where these brothers confront a child of Matholwch. So if Matholwch is the sky, this child would be in the role of like the human offspring, the human ancestors, right? This child is named Gwern, meaning alder. So it's another tree name. It has this perfect alignment. And right before Ethnician violently throws this child into the fire, uh, he meets the brothers in turn. So it is this scene where if you think of Ethnician as Odin and his brothers as the brothers of Odin, it's similar to when the brothers of Odin and Odin confront the tree offspring, the tree ancestors rather. Um, so we can see hopefully that alignment makes sense. So that tells you that um, if you understand these other details, that Nisian and Manawydan are probably something similar to the two brothers of Odin. And it tells you that this idea of having three brothers in the first place in this mythos is probably consistent, or was consistent to some degree. So that's fascinating on its own. So then if you go to the Irish case, you can see this same pattern emerging, including three brothers who are the Avengers. But what you have to do is first identify Mother Earth. There's always multiple steps, especially for Irish, because every single step has kind of been unknown and not established. But I established in a different video that Eriu, meaning Ireland, is Mother Earth because she has the same Mother Earth mythos of being impregnated by the sun god Elaha, and then giving birth to that sun god's reincarnation, who is Bress. So if you look at my sun god video, this identifies Eru as paralleling Kunti, whose other name is Prita, I think. Prita, and Prita comes from the root word for Prithivi, Mother Earth. You have this parallel established. And of course, Eru means Ireland. It is literally referring to the land, and it means something like the fatness of, the abundance, or it refers to the abundance or fatness of the land. And you then have in the Book of Invasions, you have a war that is brought about by one party, one group of brothers, upon Eru, her two sisters, and their three husbands. So you basically have Eru, and she has two sisters who have names that also are names for Ireland. So it's clearly a triple goddess kind of concept, because their names are interchangeable on the level of what they mean. They all mean Ireland. So when you understand that she's Mother Earth, this is a triple Mother Earth, pretty conclusively. And then they have three husbands who mirror them in their triplicity, because they are, Mac Grain, Mac Kecht, and Mac Quill, or Kether, Tether, and I forget the third one. But anyways, they have echoing names. Clearly, the husbands are also a triplicity that mirrors the Mother Earth triplicity. I think from there, anyone can deduce that the only archetypal mirrored pair for the Mother Earth would be this Father Sky that we've discussed. Father Sky is the other half of Mother Earth, so this essentially has to be Father Sky from that perspective, I think, or at least it is a very good hypothesis to start with. Once you establish that hypothesis, you can then take a look at this war that is perpetrated upon them by these three brothers, led by Aver Finn. Again, this takes more establishing the fact that Finn is the parallel of Cronus and Odin. So you're on solid ground in that sense. And I'm trying to go through this very quickly because I have to leave in about a minute. But I will bring up this key passage in the Book of Invasions. One second. Okay, so this is the conclusion of the war with Eru's husbands, essentially. Eru and her sister's husbands. So it's a bit confusing, and you can go over this, you can pass over this very easily. But essentially, the three brothers who are the attackers are Aver, E-B-E-R. Aver, as you can cross-reference in this section, Aver refers to Aver Finn. There is an Aver Finn and Aver Dawn, but it is not referring to Aver Dawn. You can see that it is referring to Aver Finn elsewhere. And so you have Aver, you have Averian, A-M-O-R-G-E-N, and you have Aramon. Those are the three brothers mentioned in the central stanza here. And it says specifically, Mac Kecht dies at the hands of noble Eravon. Mac Quill dies from perfect Aver. Eru dies yonder at the hands of Swirja or something. Thereafter, Mac Grania dies from Averian. So right in that central stanza, you have the three brothers that I've referred to. They specifically are killing the three husbands. So you have right here an isolated description of this event of the three brothers who are Odin and his two brothers in the Norse version, killing the three husbands, the triple husbands of Mother Earth. So you can see when you dig through that, that this is the same mythos, hopefully. Even when you have kind of scraps, if you have enough of these details, you can definitively pin this down because of the points that I mentioned. And it's kind of amazing that you once again have the three brothers, Averfin, Erevan, and Abrion. They are killing Father Sky. They are attacking Father Sky. In this version, killing, of course, a little different. But of course, Ymir is killed, and there's less negativity around these brothers here, but it's also fragmentary. So hopefully that makes sense. And any last questions or comments, Josephus?
Well, I noticed that one of our commenters thinks that there is an astrological connotation to the names of Magren, Makul, and Makecht. This would probably support the idea that they are sky related and thus ultimately possible parallels for the sky god. Also, I think that Banba and I don't know if also the other two sisters were mentioned among the companions of Keser. So maybe that's,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, helping us give some sort of place at the beginning of Irish mythical history to this episode, right? That could be a possibility, or maybe I'm just speculating.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue on its own how that relates, but yes, it's very important to then kind of see how that fits with the Kesser story. But anyways, I just think this passage is amazing. It's amazing that this is preserved right here. A nice little package of the three brothers, the Odinic brothers, attacking the three brothers that are like the head of Ymir, and right alongside the Mother Earths, who also perish in this battle, similar to how Bronwyn of the Welsh dies. So it's a symbolic death, obviously. That should be clear. It's a symbolic euhemerized story, but it means it is the moving on to the next phase of the creation, and they becoming
Going from
materialized.
the unity to separation. Actually,
Exactly.
I think Varro, as always, talks about death as the separation of body and soul, and elsewhere he describes body and soul as corresponding to earth and heaven. So separation of earth and heaven is pretty much symbolic of death and vice versa. So it does make a lot of sense that these figures die. It obviously makes even more sense because in the Irish context, it's euhemerized. So you wouldn't say that a deity dies maybe in Greek or Vedic mythology, but in this Irish version, we're talking about euhemerized beings, so death is the logical conclusion.
Yeah, and it's the same with Welsh. Those are both euhemerized, and they die in those versions. But then, of course, Ymir and even Gaiomard, they do die. I think, in a sense, at least, they are transformed into their elements. They become whatever. They go to the elements. They're absorbed into the material cosmos, I guess. So, anyways, just to conclude, I just want to emphasize that this shows, that these are the role of the Father Sky was there from Proto-Indo-European times. It's not like Uranus became a Deus Otiosus because later gods came and later traditions came and pushed him back and back. This is sort of like a false myth about the myths, that it comes about from not understanding the role that he plays. He plays this role from the beginning of this god who is the backdrop of the material cosmos. His role and destiny is to be attacked by this avenging god who shapes the world, gives shape to the material cosmos, and that attacker is the Rudra type god in every case. And that is a lot of consistency there. And so hopefully that came through and made sense. So I got to go now, and thank you to everyone for watching and commenting. And thank you again, Josephus, for discussing with me as always. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, of course, again for inviting me, and thank you to everyone who listened to the live and commented. Your comments are always so interesting, and hopefully we'll see each other for another live stream soon. Good evening, or whatever part of the day it is.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.